Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a couple more minutes. Just give some time for some other folks to join. Welcome, everybody. We're here today for DocuSign API office hours. My name is Melissa Marsh from our Developer Programs Marketing team, and I'll be moderating and helping with the Q&A today in the background. Here are our presenters. I'm here with Erin Jackson-Wild, programmer writer, who will be presenting and demoing, along with Paige Rossi, senior programmer writer, and Cole Kleinstuber, developer support engineer, who will also help answer questions via the Q&A box throughout the session and after the demo when we open up the floor to questions. Now, before we get started, I have a few quick housekeeping items to go over. You are placed in listen-only mode, and this session is being recorded. You'll receive an email in about a week with a link to the webinar recording along with other resources. Please be sure to use the Q&A button to ask any questions at any time, and we'll answer via the Q&A box or let you know we'll answer them live after the demo. To copy and save your questions and answers, simply right-click on them and copy and save them to your desktop or document. Next slide. Now, is this webinar right for you? This webinar is more technical in nature. If you're not a developer, you're welcome to stay, or you can check out our DocuSign 101 course at docusign.com/on-demand webinar/DocuSign 101, and I'll pop that into the chat for all of you. There you go. And then this is just our safe harbor notice. So all of the values, the email addresses, the keys, secrets, tokens, and other personal information you might see today are for demo purposes only, and those will be deleted or revoked after the webinar. Now you should see a quick poll in just a moment on your screen. If you can answer those questions, that will help us understand where you are in your development journey and enable us to customize content for this and future webinars. Okay, that's it for the housekeeping. So let's get started. Erin, take it away.
Morning, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day. We're going to be going over some of the various API concepts that we offer here at DocuSign. Specifically today, we're going to be going over the eSignature REST API. But before we get into that, I want to point out that there are different solutions that are available through our APIs offered, including the Click API and the Rooms API, as well as the Admin API. Right, so as I pointed out, we're going to probably be going over the REST API, and maybe we'll go over a little bit of the Rooms API as well. So the way things go with the APIs that we offer at DocuSign is that everything works with an access token, not necessarily through sessions or through login. API access tokens are available through using the Developer Center and the REST API to generate an integration key. And you can either from there use an integration key, a secret key, or an access token, private key, RSA private key to generate that access token. And you do that using our REST API, either directly through the SDKs or using raw API calls to interface and get back the information that you need. So in order to interface with our APIs, there's going to be a few different terminologies that you're going to kind of need to familiarize yourself with. Mainly the idea of an envelope, which is a transaction, ultimately. You are going to be sending envelopes which will have documents, which will be to recipients, which they will interface with using tabs to be able to get those envelopes signed. And from there, you can actually have various envelopes allocated to a specific group that's called a room. And that would come in handy for working with real estate or mortgage and loan transactions, ultimately. And that's how that product all kind of comes together. So for documents, for the document object type, we're going to have, you can have more than one document clearly to the envelope, and documents can be of different attribute form, of different types. They can either be PDF or Word, or Excel sheets, or even a database file if you'd want it to. However, keep in mind that when they're transcribed over into DocuSign's data, they're going to be converted into a PDF, and that's how the tabs and fields will be placed over those documents. Moving on, we're going to talk about recipients. There's different kinds of recipients available. Mainly for this demo, we're going to be interfacing with signers and carbon copies. However, keep in mind that you can extend and have different types of recipients and customize their attributes so that it fits your business need and purpose. So one of the key concepts to talk about also with the APIs is what is the difference between remote versus embedded signing? Embedded signing is where you would have it within your web app or software or mobile app, and it would just kind of be a seamless experience. Remote signing is where it would be the envelope would be sent via email or an SMS for your signer to complete. The main differentiator when making an API call, whether it's going to go to one type, the embedded signing, or to the other, the remote signing, is whether or not you have your client user ID attribute set. If it's empty, then it'll be considered null and it'll just kind of get sent like an email. If it is filled in with something, then they won't get, your recipient won't necessarily get an email and the envelope will be in process. From here within embedded signing, there's a recipient view that you can generate that will then have a redirect URL that you then navigate to within your application to have your end user complete that envelope. So in order to interface, like I was saying earlier with their APIs, you're going to need an access token, and an access token is generated from an integration key. An integration key is always going to be known as the client ID as well. Each application has its own integration key, except for some ISV and internal service vendor applications. For example, like an on-premise application where they may have a multi-tenancy situation going on and they only need one joint key for several integrations. An integration key can be used by any DocuSign user anywhere. It's basically your identifier for your application. One account is used to manage the integration key, and you can generate as many as you need per that demo account. I believe it's up to 100, and then you can make another account. Create and manage your integration keys with the admin panel within the Developer Center. I will go over that in a little bit. When you're ready for production, you're going to want to also click over this action and start a go live review. You should do that after you've got 20 successful consecutive API actions completed to get that going. You can use the Quickstart application, which is what I'm going to be demoing for you today, to kind of get started to see how that works, and that will create the transactions as well. All right, so without further ado, let's go over the demo. And so let's get you all started. So I would have kind of from jump, just go to developers.docusign.com. And how do I get to this quick start? So I would just kind of click onto here and I see eSignature SDK, and it's kind of right here in the middle, place to start, quick start. So clicking into that, I've already created an account, but if I had not created an account, it would ask me to create an account here. And then from here, you are logged in, and we would just name our application. So we'll call this the PHP app and 2723 for today. And then I would select it and pick next. And you'll see you'll be presented with different types of options for your project. We have a JWT grant, authorization grant, and multiple examples. For today's purpose, I'm going to pick multiple examples, which will have all types. And then click next, and I would choose to download. I've already downloaded this for you though earlier, so you wouldn't need to actually watch me kind of going through creating and installing this application. This is the app, and then I've just picked to do a composer install, and that installed the various PHP dependencies that I needed to get going on the project. And so then from here, all I'll be doing is running PHP ads to kind of run the server, localhost 8080, because that's the port that was pre-configured and opened within the application. Okay. Localhost 8080. All right. And so from here, I will kind of get started. All right, so what had happened here was the application itself presented me to the DocuSign login window using authorization code grant, and it's returned me with a prompt screen for scopes. It basically wants to make sure that me as the end user will grant application consent through this one use with the password to, with these scopes, utilize the DocuSign API, specifically the eSignature API. These scopes will change and the number of bullets will change based on the application and what you're intending to do. So let's go ahead and click allow to get it going. All right. Okay. And we will actually, this is what I'd like to show you. So we're going to request an email through signature, like an embedded signing application. And so let's get that going. This uses the envelopes create method. And as I stated earlier, it uses an envelope view to pull the redirect URL, which we will then send back. So this is my email. This is my name. And as you saw there, it sent the redirect, and this is the URL that's generated on DocuSign's end with our envelope. Let's click continue. Leverage agile frameworks. I'll go ahead and sign that. I'll click finish. And it was that simple, that quick. We've sent our first envelope. And so this is the callback URL that was pre-specified both at the integration key level when generating the OAuth token, and also separately at the example level with this embedded signing example that we've done here. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the configuration options on the Developer Center website for your application, because a lot just happened right now, and I'd really kind of like to break it down. So we downloaded this Quickstart application like I showed you earlier, right? And it was a PHP application, and that's fantastic. And so what actually happened behind the scenes was, if we click on this My Apps and Keys page, which I was holding my control key while I clicked that, so it's a new window now here. This is your Developer Center dashboard for you, right? And this is the application that I just created today. And what I would have done if I had not done that is I would manually have added this app and integration, and I would have named it here. All right. And so let's edit that. Oh, right. We go ahead and see this button here. This is what we saw earlier in the slides. You can go ahead and click this, and then you'd want to start your go live review after your application has made your API calls. And a point to note here, this status isn't real time. It takes a little bit of a delay. So maybe in about 15 to 20 minutes, we'll see that first API call with the envelope come in. Right. So when your application is created, this integration key is generated for you on your behalf. These are the 3 different integration types. There's actually 2 right here and a third one here. So going over this, authorization code grant is wanting you as the developer to present a login prompt to your end user if there is no access token or refresh token available. And so you will need to present the DocuSign login prompt, and they will then enter in their credentials, and it will generate an authorization code, which your application then sends to the API. And with that authorization code, you'll in return get an access token and a refresh token. That access token is only good for 8 hours, but the refresh token is good for up to 30 days. And so you can utilize that to kind of keep a seamless consistently logged in experience if you utilize that refresh token effectively. Conversely, you can use a service integration instead, which is also known colloquially as JSON Web Token grant authentication here at DocuSign. And so if you do a JSON Web Token grant, instead of actually prompting for a username and password each time, as long as you've gotten first use, like consent, as long as you've gotten consent granted for use, after that very first login, you can continue to just log in without a username and password. You're actually using an RSA private key, right, that you would be presenting in tandem with your integration key and with the user's user ID, and then you would be acting on their behalf. And their user ID is actually typically going to be right here, is where we show it in the UI. There is no way that I can just show you within the API how to grab or grant somebody's user ID, ultimately, because you would still need, an integration with them. It's like a chicken and egg problem. Essentially, you can grab this if the user exists within your account and you're needing to look up their information later. That would take a few more calls to kind of get that going. But for kind of the purposes and I would say for the limits of the demo, we typically just kind of have this drawn in, and this is automatically generated and pulled in through the Quickstart. Right, and going back to the actual integration itself, let's go ahead and delete that. These were generated when the Quickstart generated the application, along with all of these redirect URIs. The redirect URIs are going to be necessary when going to the login URL, because for your integration key up here, you do need a correlated callback URL that we can know is authorized to access the login endpoint so that we can send you, the data back to your application. There are a lot here. These are actually all generated by the Quickstart, and these are all of the different callback endpoints available across all of the various Quickstarts in the different languages. And there's also a couple in here as well that don't necessarily redirect back to the application. And these are based on some of our other sample apps and other applications where first time consent may be presented and we just kind of need to send you back, but we don't actually have a localized application that would make sense to send you back to, right? So that's kind of what the explanation is for why all of these are here when you generate a quick start and you see all of these here. They're just because they're associated with all of the various quick starts. All right, so I believe that covers kind of what I wanted to go over with what's here in this prompt and screen. I didn't really go much over examples, so I'm going to kind of jump back into the quick start itself, and we're going to pick a couple more examples. So this was the remote sending example, so let's go ahead and try to jump on that. Right, this was filled in by the configuration file that is presented, right? So going back to my desktop, this is the file, right? This is the uncompressed file, and this is it in my local editor. So these are the configuration files that are presented. This is what's actually within the raw application, and this is what is filled in by the quick start. All right, so what is the next that I'd like to show? Yeah, I think that covers, right. That's why, that's kind of where, right, that's where that came from and how that got filled in. So, right. So we can just put in a CC because we're using Gmail, so aliases like that are nice. Right. And because we sent it as an email this time, and we're using 3 different attachments, so that's the reason why it took a little bit longer. This is just going to be the completed done window for within this application. And this is the envelope ID that's returned to us. And so these completed ones are from the embedded signing that happened just a moment ago. This is the new one that we just generated right now. All right. Right, and so this is kind of all the data that was filled in from the envelope earlier. Okay. All right, so we click finish. All right, then we're all done. And because it wasn't necessarily an embedded application, it doesn't have a place to redirect back to. And so that's the reason why it's just showing a done signing page that was on DocuSign, because it came from the email. All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and log out, and then we're going to log back in, and I wanted to show a JSON web token, which I'm going to be calling JWT for the rest of the presentation. So as I wanted to point out, like I said, this is passwordless, but so what's interesting is you didn't see a password prompt occur here because of the cookies that were there. And so it just kind of showed this. If it was your very first time using it, we didn't do authorization code grant prior, and you didn't necessarily log in using this, this browser, because this also is part of the same cookies, right? If that hadn't happened, you would still have the password prompt the very first time. And that is the reason why you're still seeing this scopes screen here. Within this scopes screen, it's actually doing impersonation in addition to signature. And impersonation scope is required to be granted if you want to act on behalf of another signer, which is what you would be doing in the case of using JSON web token, because they're not present. The idea is they're not necessarily present to be logging in to utilize it. And so I've clicked allow, and then I'm gonna go ahead and run this again and show it kind of do that. Right. And as you can see, it just kind of just sort of works without having any login. All right. Let's see. We can let's go ahead and try the rooms API and see what we can do. All right, so as you see here, when we logged in using the rooms API, there are a lot more scopes and different scopes to actually be associated with this account. And so we're going to go ahead and allow these additional scopes. All right. So what do we want to call this room? I'm not sure. I'll call it tally room. Sounds good. Nice. Okay. So I'm pretty much going to want to make sure to configure my account so that it's good to go with rooms. In the meantime, what I can do is I can switch over and talk about I'd like to talk about, I suppose, brands. As you saw here in this DocuSign email, it's very possible to just have this standard presented format. However, if you want it, you could tailor and customize this to your liking. You can kind of change the coloring. You can change the text. I believe you can also change the button color as well. Yeah. So to do that, you would just want to create your own custom brand. Right, let's just pick that this time. And so let's see. Let's do that. Right, there we go. And so you can also do that kind of with the API as well. If you're building a much larger system to where you kind of want to offer self-service for folks for your end users possibly utilizing DocuSign within your application, you can create a brand on the spot. And so Let's go ahead and call this Sally brand. Let's set our default language to English, but we have plenty of options. So we'll go ahead and pick options. And so then, as you saw right there, we were able to just kind of create a brand on the spot. And then from there, we would be able to apply that brand to our envelope. So let's do that. I'm kind of wondering, maybe I probably should have selected a different language for you, and then you would have saw a different language within the envelope. Maybe something I wouldn't have been able to read. That would have been a good idea. Right. All right. So there we have it. Let's see. I suppose what we can do is we could kind of go behind the scenes and look at the code itself to see how things come together. Right. Let's see. Where's off? Right. So I believe the way it's always going to work is we have a public folder, and within the public folder, you're going to have an index.php, and that is going to begin a twig session, which is how we used to kind of render the pages. And we also add in a custom CRF cross-site request forgery check to make sure that no funny business is going on where you're trying to spoof the location where you're coming from. And then from there, we begin a new router service and start the router. And what's happening is every single request that happens within this application is being kind of routed through this router service, which has a list of all of the controllers and the names of the templated HTML files in the routes, and it kind of runs and renders them. And so then from there, what we're doing is we're actually looking for the API type, and basically I'm like picking rooms or eSignature or admin, and then from there I'm determining what kind of what kind of login you want it, and then I'm running the various code grant for authorization, code grant, or JWT for JSON web token as a service file. And so that's where the magic's going to happen for generating your API token. Let's dive in. I suppose we'll start with JWT because that's what I'm more familiar with. And then if you'd like, I can check out code grant. So the way that'll get started is access tokens for authorization code grant, like I mentioned earlier, 8 hours. JSON web grant tokens are only applicable for 1 hour. That's the longest amount of time that the token can be good for. You can set the token to be good for a much shorter window if you'd want it, but I'm just saying the limit is going to be 1 hour. And so what we're going to do is we're looking for a 10-minute window kind of towards the end of that hour. And if it's within that 10-minute window, we'll just try to generate a new token. And then we'll define the various required datums. So it expires in, this is going to be what it returns out for the access token. I believe this is literally just a timestamp string in like a Unix epoch, right, format. And these are returned out the account and API client. Actually, no, I believe the API client is used as an input because this is extracting down, right? It's taking that from and then going out with it. So yeah, we generate the API client and then we check the access token if it's good or not using that token replacement time, right? And then what'll happen is when an access token is returned, we also get an expiration window, and so we set that expiration window, and that's how we know whether or not the token is bad after the application has been open. And if that's not there, then we just kind of run the whole login, which is this here. And what's happening is we are going to use this internal private function, internal configure JWT authorization flow by key. That's down here, right here. That's all that is. And that's pretty much going to be just access token, right? And then once we have the access token, we're also we're going to use that to also grab our user information, and that's colloquially known as get user info across the various languages within the various apps we've got. It's going to be the call that you're going to need to make after running the call to get your access token. And let me show you why. Right. So within the API, practically speaking, every different API call is going to need that account ID, like within the path, because that's your identifier for knowing who am I interfacing with within your integration, right? And it's going to be everywhere in just about every single different required API call. Oh, cool, chunked uploads. Let's check this out. What's that? Right. I believe that just kind of makes it so it's easier to be able to process a very, very large document. Right. So yeah, that's the necessity for having the get user info call that happens there. We can ignore that. Right. So what's happening here is if we were attempting to log in or run an example, like clicking an example and not logged in, here, let me actually show you exactly what I'm saying. If I'm here, right, and I was just, oh, whoops. So it's kind of funny. It's actually kind of gated me out, so I can't necessarily show you what I'm trying to show you. But ultimately, if I were attempting to click an example right here without being logged in, it would then do that whole login prompt. But due to the way the router performs and functions within PHP, on that router file, it's kind of always going to force me back out to the login page. But that's not going to be the case with every different language. Some will kind of boot you or will allow you to see the example and run through. And so run through kind of going to click the example. And what's happening there is, because it's kind of a consistent and similar code base across a similar line of actions. So what's happening is if the location is set to where it was, it will then redirect back to it. If it was not logged in, it logs in. Right. So right, this is that internal function itself. So let's show you that. So we're going to set basically the OAuth base path, and we are going to also get the private key file, right? The RSA private key that was generated by the Quickstart. And we're going to then run this request JWT user token. And this is going to be an SDK method that is located within the API client, which we've pulled into this function, remember, as a required parameter, right? So that's how we do that. And we then pull in the client ID, the user that is also like in our config. And in this case, it's just ourselves, right? That's what this ID is. And then the private key and the scope, which is going to be like signature and impersonation. And then we're just going to return the output of that. And the output is typically going to be that access token and that expiry. With JWT, if it's the very first time logging in, typically an error will be thrown here, and that error will say consent required. And so within this application, we're just kind of redirecting back out to the end user. And that's how JWT is grabbing access tokens in PHP. All right. Let's see. Okay, I've got a bit more time. Let's go ahead and go through authorization code grant as well. So with the code grant service, right, this is where it's doing CRF token check. I believe it'll also do this across the various examples as well. The way our applications are working these days is we have the controller code, which is kind of this, and then we actually have some services code, which is this. So I kind of jumped ahead because I used a link, but basically source controllers, and then there's another folder that's services, and services, like each different example has a service that's correlated to the controller file that's actually running the work and doing the actual API calls. And it sort of it's interweaved to try to make it a bit more dry. I suppose that kind of mimics what you'd see in a real world application. And because of that, to me, in my opinion, it seems to take a bit of a monolith structure. But I suppose that's what must be done so that you can have this one application support the various APIs and configurations associated. Oh, and before I get more into the weeds here, just to show you, that's going to be listed here at github.com under DocuSign and code examples PHP. That's where these files live and are hosted. The sample app, or sorry, the Quickstart, where is it? It's not here, but it's I've already navigated away. The Quickstart is actually pulling from this, filling in this information and pulling from this to generate your customized DocuSign application. And it's literally just kind of auto-populating and refilling in these fields. All right, so where was I? I was kind of talking about the actual services code, but I was kind of jumping ahead of that. Before getting into that, let's go ahead and talk about what was here within the code grant service, right? So login. So this is actually going to be using I want to say actual an actual dependency kind of within, I wanted to say OAuth League is what it uses. And so that's the reason why I was able to kind of, there's not actually an SDK method that's used. What we're doing is we're creating an OAuth provider object, right? And we're just going to basically label it as DocuSign as the OAuth provider type. And within that, we're going to provide these various config options that are also set and predefined within the config. And from here, we then have some, we then also have some similar structure that comes in and basically checks kind of OAuth state, which is set and specified within a twig handler in the application on public within that index. And from there, we're going to be presenting that. And that's what's going to be used to go to that login prompt. And then the login prompt from there, we will accept both the OAuth state and the authorization code, right? And that authorization code is then sent using this provider, right? And like this provider's attributes, right? And the authorization code that's presented. And we then send that together. And from there, the API, REST API will then return back a different object that's just kind of like JWT, except for it has a refresh token in addition to the access token and expiry. And so I believe from there, there's also a couple of, see, this is within the SDK. There's a way to actually, this is basically using the OAuth user info method ultimately. This get resource owner is another form of that, right? And so, but it's kind of using the League OAuth to built-in method to do that with the access token to pull back the user's attributes from there. this account info is going to be the these attributes can be used together. This is the user info call, right? Let's get account info here. And then from there, we're going to be grabbing the account name, which is, like I said, the path required variable that you're going to be using going forward and all subsequent API calls. Okay, so it looks like I'm pretty close to time here. We've got about 3 minutes. I suppose I can dedicate that time in the rest to Q&A.
That'd be great. Thanks so much, Aaron. Great presentation. Paige and Cole, do we have questions that would benefit everybody on the call?
Yeah, so I just had to hop off mute there, but there's been a handful in the Q&A so far, but I think some of the more general ones that might apply would be just kind of a recap of the process that we had ran through for how to go back and go step by step through this process, whether you're using the Quickstart or whether you're starting from scratch. The general suggestion for that would be doing a search for Go Live DocuSign in Google. That will show what we've ran through on the call, but in addition, it'll be more of a focus on starting from scratch. And again, that's just the Go Live DocuSign would be a good search term for that to get you that article. And I think, let me just see if that's where we're going here on the screen share, but even here on the screen share too, for all of the general API requests, because I have seen a handful of questions on can you do XYZ, get users login information or pre-fill information on a template in the chat. The support center here, which is on the screen share, is a really good place to start, either under that Get Started tab where we have examples of creating an envelope based on a template, or more specifically, using the actual reference. So we do have the SOAP and the REST API. I would, in general, suggest using the REST API just for newer developmental purposes, and that's where the bulk of engineering is working on right now. But as we see on the screen share here, for a handful of those questions that were in the chat just regarding can you do XYZ, the REST reference will be a really good point for that. If you're working with envelopes, on the left-hand side, there's an envelope section. If you're looking or working with, for example, recipients, you would want to go to the recipient section. But it really just depends on what exactly that end goal is to get a better idea of where you might want to navigate to while inside of that reference. Looking through a few of the questions as well in the chat right now. I'm just trying to pull up some of those. One I see is on embedded signing. So it goes back to what was shown earlier, remote versus embedded. You can think of embedded as your application is going to handle the process. Remote might mean that the recipient, Bob Smith or Sally Smith, they're getting an email that says, hey, Bob or hey, Sally, please sign the envelope. If you're using that embedded workflow, the user would see the document based on your custom code. So it is a more advanced workflow because you have to write some code on your own server, a front end and a back end, to generate the recipient view. Sometimes, for example, it might be in an iframe, or it might be in whatever that view controller that you're using on your application might be. But towards the question specifically, if you're using embedded, the recipient will see it only if you develop and write code that presents the signing session to them. If that isn't the route you want to go, that's where you could use remote signing. So let me just take another look. And Paige, if there's any in particular you had seen, feel free to jump in. I'm just going through that list of open questions currently as well.
Yeah, there has been a lot about embedded signing and also maybe like a little confusion with embedded sending. I don't know if that would be helpful to just talk through. And then I also saw a question where the answer was bulk sending, so it might be helpful to show that bulk sending example that we have.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Let's see. So let me, I guess, quickly jump on what embedded sending is. So embedded sending is the idea of instead of sending the document, like it's like you can, it's like having, I think of it like in-flight request. And so what I mean by that is I send the envelope, but before I send it, I have some specific customizations that maybe are tailored to that customer or that contract or that specific use case that I need to modify and tailor around. Maybe I have an existing brand template that uses this, but there's more things I need to add to it. And so it would make sense that, and maybe it's not necessarily just me, but it's within the workflow of my, my employees, right? And so I need them to be able to edit this document before sending it out. And so that's why we need to do like an embedded sending, right? Is that it? Sending? Yeah, okay. All right. And so what you're going to have here, right, is you're going to have a starting view as the person who's sending off the document. A tagging view, which is where I can add and specify the various tabs that I have and want to have defined available for my given documents, or just the recipient and documents view where I want to actually add the documents for that given user that I intend to have signed. So let's do that. Nice. That's enjoyable. Okay. I'm not sure what happened there, but basically what will happen is it will send you to an envelope view with kind of a preview before the fact, and then from there you can send it out. I can manually generate an envelope so you can see kind of what that preview would be if you'd like. But just before I do that though, let me go ahead and show the other bulk sending example, or sorry, bulk signing example, which is even going to be just a little bit different. Oh, sorry, there it is. All right, and so what basically this has two examples here, but the idea is you can extend this out to as many as you'd want it. I believe there's a limit. I don't remember what that limit was. I know it was in the thousands, but I don't remember what exactly it was. Right, so $, plus CC1. And CC1, CC2, $, plus CC2. I hope I'm on that right. Other $2. Plus $2. Signer 2. That's a whole lot of carbon or what are they called? Aliases, yeah. All right, and so that's kind of how that happens here. Now, what will occur is this doesn't happen in real time. It's going to kind of batch it, and so it's kind of processing the batch. And I believe you can refresh this page in a couple of minutes, and it will show that they're done or ready to go. Wait a minute, I can't do that. If I do refresh it, it's going to try to resend another envelope. Yeah, so yeah. That's that there. All right. And
Yeah, that's helpful. Another question just came up, which we can probably answer live, which is authentication only for the user of your application? while the end user who signs the document doesn't need authentication, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one other note based on
Actually,
these.
I'm sorry. I want to point out though that that is completely configurable as how you want. You can set up recipient authentication as well, so that it needs to be password locked, or so that it needs to have an access code or a knowledge-based authentication, or even an ID verification-based check if you'd wanted. You also have the ability to force it so that the signer does need a DocuSign account and does need to be logged in before they can sign the document. So just to point that out. All right, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. And yeah, I would agree with that on the idea of authentication. There is that recipient authentication where you might need to have knowledge-based questions in order to access an envelope. But on the subject of general authentication, in order to make an API request, there is the newer idea that DocuSign will be requiring OAuth 2.0. So one thing to keep in mind when you're developing out a new application is that before you can make any API request, whether you're trying to create an envelope or get users, you need to authenticate. And the two main ways that we will see, at least in that perspective of support with new applications, would be authorization code grant and JSON web token. Those usually cover 95% of customer use cases. Which one you choose depends on a variety of factors, but the main difference, if you use JSON web token, that might be best suited for a application where it's automated. For example, you want to send out envelopes at 2 a.m. every day, and you don't want a user to be present. The other alternative that's most used is authorization code grant. That would be more suited for a situation where the creator of the envelope, or the owner, the person who had actually sent the envelope to someone, varies. So if you have multiple employees at your organization and you want them to be the owner of the envelope that they send, authorization code grant would be the way to go for that, but it would require the end user to be present. In other words, authorization code grant doesn't work well for automated processes. So in short, automated processes typically would fall towards JSON web token, and individual user interactions through the API would typically fall towards authorization code grant. And we have examples on how to get those created in our references for each of the different languages that we support, like C#, Java, Python, and more general knowledge on the developer website as well. And then I do see, Donnell, there's a question regarding the upload method. For that one, I would say it seems a bit more complex for the Q&A here. What I might suggest is opening a support case at the DocuSign support site, which should be just support.docusign.com. The reason for that is typically when you are using specific methods and seeing different variances with them, seeing the code is going to be valuable. And that's where an actual support case might be useful for those. And I'm just looking through some of the newer questions that had came in. One is around, does the signed document get sent back to a web application, which is a good point. By default, no, but we have what's known as DocuSign Connect. You'll find it in your developer account under Settings Connect, and it's a webhook service. So what that means is you can define when an event happens, you'll send data somewhere being your own server. So again, it's under Settings Connect. Googling DocuSign Connect will provide a lot more information on it, but it is a webhook type system. You can say when an envelope is created or when an envelope is voided, send me the PDF or send me the certificate of completion for that document. And again, that's DocuSign Connect is how you can get that functionality set up. And I see one, will the document to sign itself sent to the DocuSign cloud through API? If the question is the envelope that a recipient receives, yes, you are able to send those through the API, and that is just used as the traditional DocuSign software as a service model, where it's not going to be hosted and created in your application, but on the actual DocuSign server.
Hey, cool. That's about all the time we have for questions. So if you and Paige want to kind of go through and finish wrapping up responding to those that are still in the queue, that would be great.
Sounds
Erin,
great.
would you mind going back to the presentation? Perfect. And the resources slide. More, there you go. Great. And thank you so much to all three of you for answering all the questions. Super appreciate that. So for those of you whose questions we might not have gotten to, if you have more, you can reach out to us at developers@docusign.com, and this team will follow up with you today after the webinar. And then you can also post questions on Stack Overflow and tag them with DocuSign API for a community response. Or you can join us for one of our upcoming webinars. We have API office hours again, live from Seattle, March 7th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, as well as our global offerings in London, Australia, and Brazil. We'll also host an authentication webinar, again, featuring our very own Erin Jackson-Wild on March 21st. So feel free to go to developers.docusign.com/developer-events to register for any of those. And then there's just a number of other resources here that we'll send to you after the webinar. Next slide. Okay, so if you're a partner, an ISV partner, the process to get started at DocuSign is a little bit different. You don't want to like kick off with Quickstart. So here are some links to get you started as the process differs. Be sure to visit here instead to kick off your API, your partner API journey. And you can become a partner at the partner portal or email us at partners@docusign.com, and then go to developers.docusign.com/partner/integration-guide/getting started ISV. And again, we'll send all of these links to you via an email about a week following the webinar, along with the recording as well. Okay, so then please note you will receive a survey at the end of the webinar. We'd appreciate your help sharing feedback and suggestions on topics you'd like us to cover in our bi-weekly API office hours for future sessions. And finally, I'd just like to thank everyone, Erin for leading the webinar, Paige and Cole for addressing all of the great questions that came in today. You guys rocked, as did our audience. You had some fantastic questions. So thank you all for joining us and submitting those. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, and we hope to see you again. So thank you, everybody. Have a great remainder of your day.